So our next on our agenda is the Respectful Workplace Policy, an education session on our new policy. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking to you. Now, do I have a clicker up here, or how's that working? Oh, it's coming. Thank you, Ms. Donna. Where do I click to? Oh, there we are. Okay. I'm trying to figure out where do I click down towards down here to change? Yeah, I want to go back though. There we go. Now I got her. I should be looking down here instead of looking up there. Okay. So I want to share with you this morning some details on our Respectful Workplace Policy and Harassment Prevention Plan. Obviously, I'm not going to cover everything that is in our policy. We did share the policy with you, and I certainly hope that you took the opportunity to read it prior to convention. This is the overview of the session this morning, and if you have any questions throughout my presentation, certainly type them in the chat box, and we will try to get to them at the end of the session. Having a respectful workplace policy is nothing new for RNU. We've had a long-standing policy in place, and we always have had high expectations that our RNU spaces be free from harassment and violence. But then, of course, there was legislation passed, provincial legislation passed in January of 2020, and that legislation required us to take another look at our policy and have a policy that was more in-depth and structured, and a plan to prevent, report, and investigate incidents of harassment and violence. Part of that legislation was also a requirement that we have a training plan or an education plan with our employees, volunteers, and members so that they would understand the policy as well. So sharing with you and having this education this morning is meeting our requirement under the legislation to do education with our leaders and our members. Just to get us started, take a moment and ask yourself what comes to mind when you think of what a respectful workplace means. For me, when I thought about that, I thought of no intimidation. That's what a respectful workplace means to me. And I just encourage you to take a second and type in a word in the chat box of what a respectful workplace means to you. We'll just take a couple of minutes and see what people say. What does a respectful workplace mean to you? Freedom of speech, supported, transparency, happy work environment, respect, safety, kindness, equality, stress-free communication, consistency, mutual respect, empathy, empowered, effective communication. So many words, and they all feed into and fit as part of our respectful workplace policy. So our respectful workplace policy and harassment prevention plan, just an overview. The policy plan places a lens of awareness on RNU-sponsored events, including socials, and subsequently decreases risk of exposing employees, volunteers, and members to potential harassment or violence. The intent of the plan, many of these things were mentioned in your comments. Encourage open communication to ensure the union environment is free from harassment or violence, and persons are respectful of each other, words that you used. Make everyone aware of their responsibilities. So people have responsibilities under our plan. Identify types of behaviors that constitute harassment and violence. Establish and set out mechanisms to deal with formal and informal complaints, and provide disciplinary or corrective measures up to including dismissal to address behavior. So who does our policy apply to? It applies to RNU employees, the board of directors, elected volunteers, members attending union-sponsored events, and those who deal with the organization, including consultants and service providers. In short, everyone. It goes far beyond union office here in St. John's. And where does it apply? What applications? Any place union business is conducted. So it could be at our office, branch meetings, if you're traveling as a union representative, conferences, if you're at a training session sponsored by RNU, social gatherings, and it even covers online communications, including my RNU discussion forum, branch Facebook groups, for example, social medias, and emails. Education and events. So we do a lot of education and events, and this convention is one event that we pull off, yes, that we offer every 2 years. And all events will begin by reviewing the policy. So this morning I made a quick reference to the policy, and what we will be doing is that every event that we host will be making sure our members understand the policy. And make sure you don't let the term workplace throw you off, because it doesn't just apply to a place of work. We could also be in a social event. So if we, this evening at our gala, our policy applies to people attending the gala. If we were having a fun night at convention and we were all having fun at an event, our policy still applies to that event because it is an RNU sponsored event. And part of the policy is looking at our processes and actively preventing unacceptable behaviors. What we want to do is make sure our members are educated about what is or isn't acceptable, whether that be behavior or comments. And this policy and this plan requires that we all go a bit further, in that it means decreasing risk and avoiding behavior that could be perceived as unacceptable or could make someone uncomfortable. So could be perceived as being unacceptable or make someone uncomfortable. One of the recent decisions that your board of directors made was that we have now introduced separate hotel rooms for members at RNU-sponsored events. For many, many years, the requirement was that you share a room with another delegate. But under this policy, we wanted to decrease any risk to our members, because that could make someone uncomfortable having to share a room with someone that they don't know. And this obviously will have cost implications for our organization, but the board firmly believed that we needed to err on the side of caution and follow the policy, and they will deal with the cost of it after. We also have a new policy which provides direction on alcohol provision and cannabis consumption at RNU-sponsored events. So no longer will there be unlimited tickets for alcohol, and when you read the policy, you know that cannabis will not be allowed to be consumed at any RNU-sponsored events. So we've already started to apply the policy to RNU. So let's talk about unacceptable behaviors in our harassment prevention plan. Behaviors that constitute harassment and violence may be discriminatory, sexual, or personal in nature, and can range from unwanted comments to the use of physical force. So it can be microaggressions, you know, someone saying a snide remarks, right up to an act of physical violence. And all behaviors are to be taken seriously. So we're going to talk about discriminatory harassment for a few minutes. I'm not going to take time to read all of this slide, but there are words bulleted there that are critical to understanding this policy. So in discriminatory harassment, by someone who knows or who ought to reasonably know that the comment or conduct is unwelcome. So it's not just that you know that that is unpopular or unwelcome. It also applies to things that you ought to reasonably have known that that comment was inappropriate. So generally, you know how we say something, well, I probably shouldn't say this, but if you're having to do something and if you're wanting to say something and saying that in advance, I'd suggest you shouldn't say it. Because what you're trying to do is feel out the room as whether this is going to offend someone, right? So if you're thinking like that, chances are it will offend someone, and you ought to know that it will offend someone. That's why you're asking the question. Examples of discriminatory harassment include things like stereotyping or making comments about a person's race or color or language, religious jokes. I'm not going to give a pile of examples, and continuing with jokes that when others have said, you know, that makes me uncomfortable, can you please not tell jokes like that again, but you continue to tell them. So that is discriminatory harassment. Next, I want to talk for a few minutes about sexual harassment. Again, you will see bold words in the slide. So ought reasonably to be known to be seen as intimidating or offensive behavior to another person, or might reasonably be perceived as placing a condition of sexual nature on employment, opportunity for training, promotion, or receipt of services or contract. Examples of sexual harassment include things like inappropriate comments or commenting on people's physical attributes or appearance, inquiring about a person's sex life, vulgar or sexual jokes, oral, written, or graphic, repeated unwanted social or sexual invitations, and then, of course, right up to indecent exposure or sexual assault. And now on to personal harassment. And I point out again that the words in the document say that is known or ought reasonably to be known to be unwelcome. So You can't, the excuse of, well, I didn't realize someone would be offended by that. You ought probably to have reasonably known that yelling at anyone is going to offend someone. So you can't say, well, I didn't realize, because this is something, a behavior that you ought to have realized. So some examples of personal harassment include yelling or using profanity, bullying, deliberately not speaking to someone, ostracizing them, undermining someone's work deliberately, spreading rumors or gossip, threatening, belittling, or humiliating a person. Workplace violence. Now, this is the attempted or actual use of physical force against an individual, or any threatening statement or behavior that gives the individual reasonable cause to believe that physical force may be used. So if you're backing someone up against the wall and yelling at them, that's a violent behavior, and it's very threatening. It also includes family violence and things like threatening phone calls or emails. Those are some definitions. So let's talk for a few minutes about our respectful workplace policy and the volunteer role. Volunteers have a significant role in applying this policy. You're on, excuse me, I gotta get a drink. There we go, see if that's better. Ooh, not much better, is it? You are on the ground and you organize and facilitate union business regularly. And we can't apply or enforce this policy across the province without our volunteers. Now, I know currently in your meetings, you're asking people to be respectful. You're not tolerating yelling or people using profanities. If someone approaches you and says, you know, so I felt very uncomfortable because whatever, then you're doing things to respond to those situations. So, I mean, some of this work is happening and you are monitoring these behaviors within your branches and your meetings and events already. So you're already doing very good work. But we want under this new policy that we as an organization have to ensure that all of our members understand the policy and who is responsible for what in applying the policy. And as volunteers, obviously, we want to be leaders for our members. We want to be demonstrating to them what respectful behavior is. Not engaging in bullying or harassing and violent behavior. Reporting whenever you see someone violating the policy, not keeping it to yourself and just ignoring it. Because you're a leader. If you see something going on that you go, that is really inappropriate, then you might want to step in and have conversations and say, look, we have a respectful workplace policy, and I think, you know, what I just witnessed crossed a line on that. So I'd like for you to read the policy and, you know, and we can have another chat or however you want to approach it. But we can't let that behavior go unaddressed and comments made about it. You know for yourselves that when you've been in branch meetings and some of this behavior starts to rise, you can see the tone of the meeting change, right? People start to get uncomfortable, and then you see people, you know, maybe, well, I'm not going to speak on an issue. If that's what happens when you speak, that someone yells at you, it causes people to withdraw and not participate. So having the policy and reminding people at the start of your meeting about the respectful workplace policy will set up your meeting in a positive way And also, the policy will allow you as a branch to address those issues immediately because you have the policy backing you up. This is also really, we talk about Facebook face-to-face meetings or discussions, but this is just as important in branch Facebook groups or online spaces. And, these environments can grow toxic pretty quickly if issues aren't identified. And we've all seen them in some of the online forums, at a CBC forum or a BOCM forum, and even some of our own Facebook posts. When people start to engage in opposing point of views, it can get hot and heavy. And many times we've had, as an organization, had to take down comments because we felt that the comments were ineffective and were disrespectful. And we don't want our members engaging in this the behavior, which distracts from debating and having conversations about the issues, right? It gets very, very personal. And also, and I know this is probably information you've already heard because your employers have their own respectful workplace policies, and they too have new requirements under legislation and requirements to do education with their staff. So I know you're probably getting this information from your workplace, and we just wanted to share how this policy applies to RNU as an organization. So once again, as a reminder that this policy applies whether you're attending a union event, holding a meeting, participating in an online space such as the My RNU forum. And applying these policies is difficult. We have 5,300 members. We can't police and watch everything they say and do, but we do the best that we can. We share the policy as much as we can and educate our members on the policy whenever we can. So that's why we're going to be acknowledging the policy at the beginning of our provincial events. And we're recommending that you do the same at your branch meetings. This will help set a respectful tone for the event or the meeting from the get-go. Also be mindful that this also applies to social events. So when you're planning social events, you need to think about, okay, we're going to be going here, and there's going to be signs around saying this is an RNU event. So what do we need to do to mitigate risks around that in terms of the event being as respectful of our policy that we have? You could do things like introducing a designated safe person who members can go to with questions or concerns as a complaint, just like we did this morning, where we designated 2 board members. And our team can help you with your plan, especially around social media, because we've put guidelines now in relation to our My RNU discussion forum and reminders about people being respectful when they're speaking on the forum. So we can share some of that information with you.